Aslan says, looking back at Wano, Luffy was fucking desperate to beat Kaido with that last gear fourth. Like, don't tell me you weren't nervous for Luffy all of 1042. I don't know what you want me to say for that. I think that chapter had 1042 was cool because I think that's the chapter that ended. Yeah, 1043 is when he had the awakening. Yeah, 1042 was cool because the tone was serious for that chapter. What wasn't cool to me was how light it was everything preceding. So, how do I explain this? It feels a little odd to me always if Oda kind of, like, not always, but it felt a little, because the tone for Luffy versus Kaido for the vast majority of it was extremely light. It was ha ha ha, he he, ha ha ha, we're having fun, right? This is, like, I'm not, like, this is just factually, those are panels that exist throughout that fight, right? It is a lighthearted fight for a good majority of it, especially once Luffy comes back to the roof the next time, right? It has some cool moments, right? Like when they first split the sky, but after that, kind of anytime you cut back to them, it's pretty comical. Not comical is maybe too harsh to say, but there's not really any, like, they are fighting for fun at the end of the day for the most of it. Then 1042 comes around and it's like Oda suddenly is like, well, now they're angry and now they're serious. That's not something that really works for me that well, because while the tone of that chapter is good, if I look back at all of Luffy's previous fights, the tone being serious was something that was just organically built over the course of the flow of the narrative, right? Like Luffy versus Crocodile, it's not like they were fighting in the tombs and like the whole fight with the tombs, Luffy's like, aha, I'm having fun beating you, like I'm having fun against you, Crocodile, and Crocodile's laughing and having fun against Luffy. It's like, no, the tone is deathly serious coming in there because it mirrors what's going on upstairs, which is countless millions of people, basically their lives at stake, serious war going on, all the Straw Hats, Vivi in tears, Nami in tears, the Straw Hats are desperate, etc. Luffy is down there with blood on his fist, like blood streaming down his face. Everything is serious from the start, and the tone is deathly serious from the start, right? When Crocodile's laughing against Luffy in the round 3, it's because Luffy's on the ground, poisoned, helpless to get up, as Crocodile's basically reveling in the execution of his unstoppable plan basically taking place upstairs, right? Luffy getting up is very, very dramatic in that sense. Like, there's just a lot that narratively is fueling and making me really feel the weight of what's happening and, like, the seriousness of the tone throughout that round 3, because it's not as though suddenly Luffy's just being like, okay, now I'm angry again. I remembered I'm supposed to be angry. I'm remembering that, like, we're supposed to be fighting for the scabbards and everything like that. It's like, no, like, there's no room for laughter here in the first place. Right? There's no room for laughter. When Luffy finally gets up and finally gives Crocodile the ass kicking he deserves, it's a long buildup of continuous anger and seriousness and motivation and drive from Luffy, and a continuous, consistent tone that leads to that cathartic, defeat of Crocodile, which I really, really appreciate. And I'm using Crocodile as the example there, but I can talk about the same thing for Luffy versus Lucci and how that entire fight played out and the tone throughout that fight. Same thing with Luffy versus Doflamingo, right? Same thing with pretty much all of these major battles that we kind of recognize as like being the greatest in One Piece. Even if I go back to things like Arlong early on, Luffy versus Arlong had a good comical section in the middle, with Luffy trying on Arlong's teeth and everything like that. But what was really cool to me was that when the time came for things to get serious, right? It wasn't just suddenly Luffy being like, oh, you know what? I'm angry now because I just remembered that I'm fighting for Nami, so I'm supposed to be angry, which is how I felt 1042 was. It's just generally how I felt most of the ending of Luffy versus Kaido was. Like, the tone shift was basically very unearned. Instead, what happened with Luffy versus Arlong was that there was a clear dramatic trigger that Oda figured out to shift the fight to being very, very serious for its conclusion, to shift Luffy from being goofy Luffy to angry Luffy. And that was Luffy finding Nami's room, right? Luffy inside Nami's room, when Arlong threw him up there, suddenly a switch flipped for Luffy. Suddenly a switch flipped for Luffy, a switch that was very, very earned, because the switch was basically the crux of the story in that Luffy was discovering everything that Nami had been through as a child all these years before he had met him, right? He's in Nami's room, he's seeing the blood-crusted pen and everything like that, and he's realizing this is what Arlong has been doing to her. Right? And from that moment on, you can go back. I encourage you, open up the chapters, go read that chapter. That's when we switch from goofy Luffy to serious Luffy. That's when we switch to the Luffy that's basically going to just destroy Arlong right now, right? That's when we switch to the Luffy who basically makes it so that Arlong's sword can't even move. He cracks the sword. He breaks Arlong's nose. He begins destroying the room in an absolute rage. and he tears all of Arlong Park down. Very, 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 very earned emotion, right? That's like the shift in tone is built into the story so well. It's not just Luffy being like, okay, enough laughing. I forgot that this is supposed to be a serious battle. Now I'm angry. Now it's Gear 4 time. Now it's desperate. It's like, why is it desperate now? Right? There's no real trigger for this. It's just kind of like Oda checked off all the other fights. Therefore, now it's, oh, well, we have to force some drama into the end of the story. Therefore, now I'm just going to say the tone shifted. Now it's serious. That's to me just like such a far cry from what Oda usually does so well over the course of most of these final battles. At least that's the difference that I felt reading the end of Luffy versus Kaido versus the end of Luffy versus Arlong, Luffy versus Doflamingo, Luffy versus Crocodile, Luffy versus Lucci, Luffy versus Katakuri. That's just me. Ender Ayanami says, gotta put this rant on more